recording. Let's admit this person and then let's share the screen. Okay, so we're doing everything on No Fear Shakespeare, which is on your Google Classroom. There's a link to it right now. You can see that this is very straightforward. It has a translation right beside the actual. Hold on, let me mute you. It has a translation right beside the actual text of the play. It is a very straightforward way to read. Hey, what's up, Trey? It's a very straightforward way to read Romeo and Juliet because it allows you to basically like just know exactly what is being said. Today, we're going to read the prologue and act 1, scene 1. So it's just the first little bit. We're going to go over everything about it. I'm going to annotate and introduce you to the whole world that we're about to be doing. So really, as long as you're paying attention and you're like present, there should be no problems. If you have a question, I'm pretty sure you can like right click and like raise your hand or something, right? Can't you? I think that's a thing. I can also just unmute you guys. Let's see. Let's admit Katie. Oop. Oh no, that's a nightmare. Why did I admit you?
No. God.
Let's mute you all again. That was horrible. All right. If you need to unmute yourself to ask a question, please do. So yeah, this is where you're going to be reading. You can see that you even have a character list and stuff on this. This is a very good resource. But first, before we do that, we are going to get into some background for Romeo and Juliet. So what I'm going to do to this page is I'm going to annotate it, and then I'm going to go over the whole thing. And then on that assignment that I've put up, I am going to actually, on that assignment that I put up, I'm going to actually, am I recording this? I hope so. Yeah, I am. Okay. I'm going to put up the annotated version of this as well. So this should be pretty straightforward. All right. So Romeo and Juliet, written by William Shakespeare in, we think about 1604. It was, or no, was it 1598? I can't remember. So it was written in the Elizabethan era. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. So specifically what that means is that it will end in death. Now, basically, why do it like that? Yeah, this is fine. Basically, anyone going to see this play would have known that this was a play that was going to end in death. This is like going and seeing a horror movie. The expectation was, when you go and see a horror movie, you don't expect it to end in a marriage. It was similar to a tragedy. Romeo and Juliet is a notable tragedy because it has been incredibly impactful. Oh, wow. I bet you guys couldn't hear me very well. Romeo and Juliet is a notable tragedy because it's been incredibly impactful and has sort of like resonated throughout the history of narrative. It's a play that gets riffed on and remade and turned into movies and referenced probably more than any other play. It's an incredibly important play, and it's a play that you basically have to know to be sort of like an intelligent adult. We're reading it not just because I love it, which I do. I think it's a very good play, but also because I think it's like genuinely an important thing for you to read to just be like a educated person. Romeo and Juliet is set. Now, this is kind of the thing that's a little tricky to understand. Romeo and Juliet is set before it was written. It was written in the 1600s. It's set in the 1400s, 1300s. It is set in Italy. It was written in England. English people at the time had some very particular stereotypes associated with Italian people. Italian people were thought to be hot-blooded. They were thought to be emotional. Italian people were thought to be like very easy and quick to anger or quick to love, quick to violence. So it kind of like a lot of what you'll see in this play is people acting impulsively and kind of silly, but that was in line with what English people expected. So I'm going to introduce every character in the play here. We're going to do some annotations and I'm going to make some notes on stuff. Okay. So we start with, in the center here, we have Romeo and Juliet. You don't have anything to do here, by the way. This is literally just you paying attention and listening. So Romeo and Juliet, we'll start on Romeo's side. So Romeo has two parents. Romeo's parents are Lord Montague, who is his dad, and Lady Montague. Now, this is their last names. This is not the way this society worked is that you were often identified by your last name. And if you were a lady, if you were the mom, you were just called Lady. Now, you also might see Montague as, wow, Carrington has tried to get on here like 10 times. You also might see Montague as Lord Montague sometimes, but I think generally speaking, he's just called Montague. Now, Romeo has a mentor or best friend. His name is Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence, Laurenc, was Friar Lawrence is a priest in particular who is also his teacher. All right, so that's something that's important to understand. So he's a priest and a teacher. So at the time, if you really didn't go to school unless you were rich, and if you were rich, you went to school basically to church school to learn how to like read the Bible. So Romeo is basically taught his whole life by this priest, Friar Lawrence, who is sort of like a second dad to him. Romeo has a cousin that you'll meet very soon. You'll meet him in the first scene. His name is Benvolio, which is a great, very, very Italian name. Benvolio. Okay, Benvolio has a little bit of a reputation as Benvolio is like a good boy. I would say he's like, Benvolio has a reputation as like a peacekeeper or like calm, right? That's his rep. Clam. No, he's definitely not a clam. How do I edit that? That's annoying. Although it would be way funnier if he was a clam. All right, so there we go. Romeo or Benvolio has a reputation as a calm peacekeeper. He's a good kid. He's not looking to start a fight. He generally speaking is pretty staid. Now, Romeo has a best friend named Mercutio. Mercutio is not related to him. Mercutio is just some like his buddy. Now, Mercutio is not calm. He is not a peacemaker. Mercutio is known more as a Mercutio is an instigator. I would say he's like a smart butt, if you can kind of figure out what I'm talking about here. He starts stuff. He's like a smart dude who is just way more interested in getting a rise out of people than he is about like doing the actual right thing. So this is sort of like the Romeo side of this, right? Now, Juliet, what you'll notice about the characters in this play is that they are mirrored. Every character has an opposite side person that mirrors on, like every character on one of the lover's side has an opposite person on the other lover's side who kind of just like is a foil to them, represents like the opposite of them. So like Juliet has a caretaker in the same way that Romeo has a mentor. And I'll show you what this looks like. So first, when we're doing Juliet, we'll start with her parents. Her parents are Capulet and Lady Capulet. Now, the easiest way to remember what Juliet's last name is, right? Because Romeo's last name is Montague, Romeo Montague. The way I remember Juliet's last name is Juliet Capulet, like her name rhymes. So Lady Capulet and Capulet. The thing that's important to remember about them, and that you kind of find out through inference in this story, is that Juliet is not close with her parents. Romeo seems to like kind of respect his parents, but Juliet doesn't really like her parents, and she doesn't feel like that they've done a lot of parenting for her. And we'll see that later on as we go through, because Juliet basically has a second mother. Her mother's name, we never know her full name, her second mom's name, but her second mom's name is the nurse. And the nurse is her caretaker, but it's also like her second mom / her nanny, kind of. So basically the tradition at the time, and this was true actually for a long time, this was not just true back then. If you were rich and you were a woman and you were having a kid, what you would do is you would hire what was called a wet nurse. A wet nurse was a person who would basically raise your kid for you. But the idea behind a wet nurse is that you would find someone who was having a child at basically the same time you were having a child. And then that person would breastfeed your kid as well. That's why they're called a wet nurse, because breastfeeding, milk, whatever, right? And what would kind of functionally happen is that this person would, because they were like feeding your kid and taking care of your kid and raising your kid with their kid, this person would ultimately end up being sort of like your child's second like mother, right? And Juliet does not have a very good relationship with Lady Capulet, and the nurse kind of functions as the sort of, I don't know, de facto mother, right? So then we have Juliet also has a cousin that she's pretty close to. We don't see them talk very much, but we know that they're close. Juliet's cousin is named Tybalt. Now, we talked about how these characters are foils to each other, right? So like Friar Lawrence is he's wise, he's well educated. The nurse is very loving, but she's not well educated, right? She's a commoner, she doesn't really know much. She talks kind of in slang, right? So they're opposite to each other. They're foils. So a foil is a character that represents the opposite of another character, right? So in the same way that Benvolio, who is Romeo's cousin, is like a peacekeeper who's a calm guy, Tybalt is a hothead, and he has a reputation as a fighter. Like he's a good swordsman. At the time, it was very common. One of the most common sort of things that rich young men would do would be to, we're going to move this up, just keep it a little closer. They would duel, right? And so you would fight, often not to the death, over perceived insults or slights or honor with swords. And so Tybalt is known to not just be good with the sword, but also to be very excited to use it. All right, so Juliet also has a suitor. Now, a suitor is someone who is like possibly in an arranged marriage. So basically, he is looking to marry Juliet sort of without Juliet's input. Right? So this was a pretty common thing at the time. One of the biggest uses of like sort of practical uses of having a daughter, if you were rich, was to marry her up, right? And so Juliet is only 13. She's about to turn 14. And already there's a guy trying to marry her who's like maybe 16, 17, 18. And his name is Paris. Now, Paris is a good foil to Mercutio because he's related to the same person Mercutio is related to, who we'll talk about in a second. But he is also temperamentally, Paris is like the good guy. He's like the good guy archetype. He's like very proper. He's very like sort of, he does things by the book. He's very much the opposite of Mercutio in many ways, because he doesn't stir crap up, right? He's just like the good son, right? Now, Mercutio and Paris are both related to the prince. Okay. Now, his name's Prince Escalus, but you'll probably see him called just the prince. The prince is like the absolute ruler of this place where this is. The prince is the absolute ruler of this city that we're in. We're set in Verona, which is a city in Italy. So the prince is the sort of the judge, jury, and executioner. Ruler of Verona, which is a city in Italy, right? Verone, whoops. So the prince is sort of like, there is no judicial system at the time. Like if the prince says that you're dead, you're dead, okay? So we have sort of this whole setup, and what you'll notice is that these characters are not only sort of like divided by their foil to each other, they also are sort of in different classes. And let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so like everybody on the left-hand side here, these two, the nurse and Friar Lawrence, these two are these are commoners. They are not well off. They are pretty much like just run-of-the-mill regular people, okay? All of these people in the middle here, all the way over to Mercutio and Paris, these people are all nobles. So these are like the upper class. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of power. Their power is sort of passed down, through the father to the son usually. We find out that like one of the problems that Juliet's family has is that Juliet's the only daughter. So they kind of have to marry her well, because if they don't, what can end up happening is that like if the money always would go to and pass down, like the power in every family would pass down in noble families through the son. And since she's a daughter, they have to find someone for her to marry, or like someone else is going to just take over their family, like a cousin or something. right? So all of these guys in the center here, they're all nobles. They're like upper class, but they're not really the ruling class. Mercutio, Paris, and the prince, these guys are royalty. So they are related to the king. So the way this system worked at the time was that, like, basically the king was in charge of the whole country, and each prince was in charge of one city, basically. And they were the absolute rule of law in that city. So you can see why, in that sense, Juliet's family really wants her to marry Paris, because Paris is related to the prince. So this would be sort of like a good social match. They would be marrying up, right? So here's all of our characters, right? So we're gonna save this. I'm actually gonna do this right now. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this up for you, and I'm gonna put this on. Oh God, what a nightmare. I'm gonna go ahead and put this on Google Classroom right now as we speak. No, I'm not. So stop share. Okay. So while I put this on Google Classroom so that we can all look at this together, and I'll make a copy for each person. Is there anyone who wants to unmute? If there are any questions right now, now's the time to ask them.
So what do we have to do today?
Okay, good question. So what you're going to do is we're going to go over, we just went over this big, I'm recording this, so this will be on there. So we just went over this big intro. You were going to read the first chunk, the first scene, and the prologue of Romeo and Juliet. That's all you're doing. We just need you to be kind of familiar with the situation. What you're going to find out in the very first part of this is that Romeo and Juliet, their families hate each other. They do not like each other at all. They detest each other. Okay. And the first scene that you're going to, the act 1, scene 1, the whole point of the first scene is that they get in a fight. Like there's this big fight on the streets of Verona, and the prince is going to come and give an ultimatum. This is important to set up the rest of the play. We're also going to be reading the prologue, and I want to kind of go over the prologue together right now. So we're going to go over the prologue together, then you're going to read the act 1, scene 1, and then you're going to come into tomorrow and to tomorrow's Zoom, kind of knowing what the lay of the land is, knowing how things are going, and then we will go from there. So that's all. And if you weren't here for all of this, if you came into it late, all of the background that I just did, I'm going to upload. I'm recording this right now, so I'm going to upload this video to YouTube, so anyone who's not watching this now can see what's going on. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? Anything else?
Are you gonna grade that last article response?
No, because for whatever reason we don't have a New York Times login that like y'all can use. So I'm just gonna switch to other articles that are not New York Times. Any other questions?
For me, it was the Washington Post, because that was the very last one we did.
Oh yeah, the WAPO. Yeah. It basically, so the way it works is that apparently our New York Times and Washington Post things are kind of tied to being at the school. So I'm not going to grade something that you can't get to. Any questions about Romeo and Juliet and what we're doing here? Yes, Katie. You got to unmute yourself, my dude.
I was telling my little sister to go away.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again, and I want to just like briefly kind of, you can see, I want to show you how we use No Fear Shakespeare. And I also want to show you, oh gosh, what is this doing? Okay. I also want to show you how we use No Fear Shakespeare, and I also want to show you I also want to go over the prologue. So this is the prologue to Romeo and Juliet. The prologue's kind of important because it is a tradition in many plays at the time. It was a tradition to have a guy called the chorus, who was just a person who represented the audience. He would ask the questions the audience would ask, right? He would sort of like serve as the audience's voice in the play. And the prologue would just be a time where the chorus would come out and he would tell the audience what was about to happen. Something that's important to remember about Shakespearean theater is that it was sort of like going to a pro wrestling event. Like it was not high class. Like high class people would do it, and it was, supported by the king or the queen or whatever. But I mean, if you go to the Globe, which is a reconstruction of Shakespeare's theater today, there's this area called the Pit where everyone stands up, and like the Pit was where the commoners in in this era where the commoners would come to these plays and they would just get wild drunk, and it would be really super rowdy. And basically, like, this was not considered to be highbrow entertainment at the time. Shakespeare got his company shut down a couple of times because he was like talking about things that were too racy. And there's not even like sex in these. It's just that it kind of concerns sex and there's violence. And so like this was not highbrow entertainment. So as a result, since people were like getting drunk in the audience and like going wild, you would have a guy come out for the prologue that would basically just be like, yo, here's what's about to happen in this play. So there's kind of like spoilers for the entire play in this one chunk of text, right? And he's coming out to tell everyone because like the idea was that like royals and nobles would be watching this play when it was performed, but also like just like people who worked on the streets and like just random like lower class people who couldn't even read and didn't know anything about stories. So basically you would just have a guy come out and say like, yo, here's what's about to happen. So this is the prologue. I'm going to read it. We're going to look at the no fear. We're going to go over what's happening in it. And then you guys are going to read the act 1 scene 1 independently. Right. And if you want to, you can pull this page up in front of you. It's on your Google Classroom. It's on a link. But if not, you can just look at your thing in front of you. So 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of those 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. So already halfway through, we've spoiled the whole play, right? 2 households who are both equally powerful in the city of Verona where we're going to set our play. They hate each other, and they've hated each other for a long time. There's an ancient grudge between them, right? And there's going to be a new fight that starts out where people are killing each other in the streets. Citizens of this town are going to kill each other in the streets, stain it with blood. So from these 2 families, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. So we already know these 2 people are going to fall in love and kill themselves, right? With their deaths, their parents are going to bury their argument. They're going to stop arguing because of their deaths, right? Say, don't, hey, come on. Don't, come on. Stop. All right. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. So now we're getting even more explicit, right? These 2 people are going to fall in love. It's not meant to be. They end up dead. That's what we're going to talk about, right? The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. So basically what happens here is that, you know, we're going to tell you everything that we just told you, everything that's going to happen. And we're going to go into this in more detail. And if you have any questions, hopefully this will answer it. So that is the prologue. What you can see here is the ending of this story is not in question. This is not like a spoiler alert, like what's going to happen kind of story. This is a story where the question is really more about like dramatic irony. And the same way that Oedipus is a story where we know things are going wrong and he doesn't, and that makes it worse. As we see these 2 fall in love and love each other and we start to care about their relationship and slowly things just fall apart, as we see them make these huge mistakes, that is what makes the play powerful. And Shakespeare from the very outset is setting that up because he's telling you what's going to happen. And then as you see everything sort of just like fall apart, that's the power of this play. All right. So that's the prologue. You guys are going to read act 1 scene 1 tonight. When you come tomorrow, your Zoom will just be me going over the first scene with you and then giving you your next assignment, which is that basically we're going to read a scene and then we're going to watch that scene in a couple of different movies and take some notes on it. Are there any questions? So all you do tonight is just read act 1 scene 1. I'm not asking you to take notes. I'm just telling you, read it, be prepared to understand it, and talk about it tomorrow. Any questions before we get out of here? Okay. That's all I got for you. Real tight 30 minutes. I will put this video up on YouTube. I'm going to stop the recording right now.